Greetings everyone and welcome to another episode of Fanfic Read-Through. I am Tsubaki94 and I will be reading to you my fanfic. So get those headphones on, snuggle up with your cat, the nice brew of your choice. And let's begin. Life's Trial, Chapter 7 to 8. Enjoy. Danielle was standing outside of the library, her hands moving in front of her as she talked to her friend, a dark-skinned girl with a thick curly hair, dressed in a thick winter jacket. Before Danny got to meet the girl, Danielle said goodbye to her, and she left in the opposite direction. "Friend of yours?" asked Danny, walking up beside her. Smiling, Danielle nodded. "My best friend. Her name's Amanda. She's mute, so she doesn't make friends that easily," she explained, as they started walking towards the suburbs. "Sounds like an interesting friend," said Danny, looking back at the other girl. "How did you know I was in the library?" he asked, after they walked in the silence for a moment. Danielle rolled her eyes. "Ghost sense, duh. I felt you flying over the school before, and saw you go there." She put her hands in her pockets and looked up at Danny, a big grin on her face. Smiling back at her, Danny took a closer look at his cousin. She was still shorter than him, and compared to how she'd looked the last time he saw her, she was practically glowing with energy. Unlike him, she didn't have any bags under her eyes, or any questionable scars on her face or neck. She walked confidently, with her back straight, and head held high, the complete opposite of Danny. "What happened to you after we saved you from Vlad?" asked Danny. Slowing her pace, Danny slowed down to match her speed, a dark shadow falling over Danielle's face. Biting her lower lip, Danielle avoided meeting Danny's eyes. "Do you really want to know? It's not a great story," she whispered. Shrugging, Danny looked up at the gray sky. "You don't have to tell me. I was just curious on how you came to live with the Oswalds." He felt Danielle walk behind him more than he saw her. It was some time before Danielle spoke. "I lived on the street for maybe 5 months after you and Valerie saved me. You know, doing what I'd been doing up until the thing with Dad." Her voice trailed off at the mention of Lad. Not wanting to push her, Danny stayed quiet and was rewarded for his patience when Danielle continued. "It was pretty easy to begin with. I'm a master shoplifter after all. I made some friends on the street. It was like a big adventure. That was until I got caught stealing, and none of my friends tried to help me." Tasting the bitterness coming from Danielle, Danny wished he could have been there to help her. Walking up to walk beside Danny, she continued. "Things got a bit complicated when the police didn't find any record of Danielle Fenton existing in the US. They even thought I might have been an illegal immigrant once. Eventually, I got put into foster care." Sighing, she looked up at Danny. "Oh boy, let me tell you, the system is lousy. I ran away from a first home and reported a second to the police." Looking at his cousin in surprise, Danny could only imagine what the people she ran away from thought when she just disappeared like a ghost. "Got any details?" he asked. Nodding, Danielle's eyes moved to look at the sky. The first couple already had 3 other kids living at their place, and there were some strict rules. Like no loud music, be home right after school, get above D or there's no supper for a week, finish your chores or you'll sleep on the floor, and so on. Danny found himself staring at her. "I know, sounds like a bad movie, but I was okay with it. I had a roof over my head, got a decent meal every day, and somewhere to sleep. The only reason I ran away was because the others didn't have such a great time, so we all left one night and didn't come back before the police had been turned inside and out and the entire thing was exposed." Danny whistled. "If that place was so bad, how come you reported the second place to the police?" he asked, wanting to get more details on how she and the others had gotten away from the first place, and at the same time curious as to what could have been bad enough for Danielle to call the police. "The second place was nice. I didn't have to sleep on a mattress on the floor. The other kids there liked it too. The rules were a bit more relaxed, and everyone was happy." Her face darkened. "But that was only a facade. I found out the real price of that happiness when the man of the house so to speak, tried to crawl into my bed one night. Danny could hear her knuckles pop. I gave him what he deserved, and then reported his sorry ass to the police. If the others hadn't been such cowards, he would be spending time in jail right now, but instead he's doing community service. A soft green glow illuminated Danielle's angry eyes. Placing a cautious hand on her shoulder, Danny met Danielle's eyes. He didn't say anything. They didn't have to. Danny could imagine what his cousin felt, but he knew right from wrong, and what she'd been through was wrong on too many levels. Without any warning, Danielle threw her arms around Danny and hugged him. Unsure of how to act, he patted her on the back. "I'm glad you're here," she said, tightening her hold. "No one can really understand me. Not like you can." She sighed and looked up at Danny before letting go of him. "I was placed as Mrs. Oswald's after that, and living with her is a lot better than the others. You're lucky. You don't have to deal with the whole system." "Don't be stupid," said Danny, pulling Danielle's hat down over her eyes. "I have a whole different variety of problems to deal with. Who I live with is the least of my worries at the moment." She pushed up the hat to look at Danny, who smiled back at her. "But the good thing with all of this is that I found you." Blushing, Danielle punched Danny's arm hard enough to bruise. "I was the one who found you, remember?" she said, picking up the pace. "Besides, I was never far away. If you ever needed some real help, I was close by." "Could have helped if I knew that," he said, jogging to keep up. They didn't as much as walk back to Mrs. Oswald's as they raced each other back to the house. Danny lost the race because of his still hurting leg, but Danielle was the one gasping for air when they reached the front door. Opening it, Danielle shouted, "We're home!" into the house. Limping in after her, Danny closed the door behind them. "Good! Dinner will be done in 10 minutes!" shouted Mrs. Oswald back from the kitchen, over the sound of cooking. She looked out in the entrance hall, and her expression changed to something Danny couldn't place. "Did you see Cody on your way home?" she asked. "No, I only found Danny at the library." Danielle smiled. "What's for dinner?" she asked, putting her jacket on the hook. "Beef and pressed potatoes. Go on and wash up. I'll call you when dinner is ready." She met Danny's eyes for a moment. "You got your homework assignments from your friends?" she asked. Nodding, Danny put up his jacket beside Danielle's. "Good. 10 minutes then," she said, and went back to her cooking. Taking Danny's arm, Danielle pulled him towards the stairs. "Come on, I want to show you my room," she said, and practically dragged Danny up to her room. Danielle's room reminded Danny of his own. There was a slight mess, in the form of books lying strewn across the floor, together with piles of clothes that hadn't made it into the clothes basket. There was a large map of the stars pinned to one of the walls, together with a poster of Dumpty Humpty. The desk was the same kind as in Danny's room downstairs, the only difference being that Danielle's was covered in papers, books, old homework assignments, and snacks. Flopping down on her bed, Danielle smiled. "What do you think? Mrs. O gave me the map for my birthday." Sitting down backwards on the only chair in the room, Danny nodded. "It looks nice." Then he glanced at Danielle. "When's your birthday? Is it the same as mine, or the day you were made?" he asked, curiosity getting the better of him. "Neither! My birthday is the same day you and Valerie see me." She sat up, crossing her legs. "That was the first day I was free to live my life, so that's the day I chose to be my birthday." Nodding, Danny's eyes moved over the room again, without seeing it. If he were to choose a new birthday, it would be the day of the accident, the day he became Phantom. "Who's Cody?" he asked absently. Making an exasperated noise, Danielle laid back down. "Cody is Mr. and Mrs. O's real son. He's a year older than me, and a prick. He always gets into trouble to get Mrs. O's attention. He doesn't like the foster kids that gets placed here. He's mostly the reason they leave." Leaning forward, Danny crossed his arms over the back of the chair. "What's it like living here?" he asked, wondering if he was going to have a problem with Cody. "If you ignore Cody, it's great. Mrs. O works as a receptionist at a grand hotel in town. She truly cares for the kids under her roof. She's strict when it comes to the rules, but after some time she stops looking over your shoulder. Her husband, Mr. Oswald, is a Navy officer stationed in Hawaii, It's not often he comes home. He did once this summer. Turns out he's not that interested in the foster kids living here. He spends most of the time with Cody, but I got the impression that he didn't care for us because he knew that we wouldn't be around too long. There was the sound of the front door opening and closing, and the two of them turned their heads towards the open door, listening. "Cody?" asked Danny, hearing a boy's wavering voice coming from downstairs. "Yep," confirmed Daniel. "Betcha he's not gonna like you." Daniel's prediction came true when Cody, a lean, well-built teenager with a short-cut brown hair and a square jaw, stopped in front of the open door. His eyes narrowed as he took in Danny's appearance. From the shadows under his eyes and the small red scars still visible on his face, to the worn clothes and the thin shape of Danny's arms. He smirked and looked over at Daniel on the bed. "Mom told you not to bring your street friends into the house," he drawled. Both Danny and Danielle held back their laughter, annoying the hell out of Cody. "What's so funny?" he asked, the muscles on his arms flexing. Exchanging glances, Daniel nodded at Danny. Getting up from his seat, Danny walked over to Cody. The kid's hazel eyes were on the same level as his, trying to burrow into Danny's icy blue ones. He smiled. "Hi, my name's Danny. I'll be staying here for a couple of weeks. It's nice to meet you," he said in a falsely friendly tone, giving the other boy his hand to shake. "Cody," sniffed the young boy, and took Danny's hand. "You another one of my mom's social cases?" he asked, trying to break Danny's hand with his grip. Having expected Cody's response to a simple handshake, Danny applied a small amount of pressure of his own. "I'm not a freeloader, if that's what you're asking," he replied, never breaking eye contact. Cody put more pressure on Danny's hand, only to be matched by the same. "You're all freeloaders as far as I'm concerned," he growled, and looked down at their hands. "Sorry, is my grip too hard?" asked Danny, pressing hard on Cody's hand. Swearing, Cody let go of Danny. "Does every handshake have to be a test of strength or something?" he asked, shaking his hand and glaring at Danny. Shrugging, Danny sat back down on the chair. "You shouldn't start something you can't handle," he answered, in a matter-of-fact tone, completely ignoring Cody's presence. "Whatever. Mom said to tell you that dinner is ready. She wants you to help set the table, Daniel," he said, turning away from the room. "Tell the freak he better clean up before dinner. Who knows where he's been." With that, Cody left, walking to his own room. Getting up, Daniel stretched. "Don't take it personally. Cody's just a jerk," she said to Danny, moving towards the door. "A jerk close to finding that his pants will fall down in front of a pretty girl very soon," growled Danny, considering all the pranks and practical jokes he could pull on Cody without being seen. Rubbing at his eyes, he got up from his seat again. "I'll meet you in the kitchen. I have something to put away," he said, hoisting his backpack onto his shoulder, before he simply sank through the floor down into his own room. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. Sitting down at his desk after dinner, Danny started up his computer and put his phone to charge. He was tired and just wanted to go to sleep. The food had been amazing in comparison to his mom's cooking. He had never starved at home, but sometimes he just wanted to eat the food and not have his dinner try and eat him. Taking out all his school books from his bag, Danny started on his physics homework that was due to be handed in the next day. He nodded off halfway through his history homework and would have slept the whole night through if there hadn't been a soft knock at his door. "Danny, lights out in 5 minutes," said Mrs. Oswald, opening the door. Straightening from the thick history book he'd used as a pillow, Danny glanced at the clock on his computer. 10:55 p.m. and a message for Tucker. "Yeah, 5 min." He yawned and got up from the chair, stretching. "You fell asleep doing your homework?" asked Mrs. Oswald, giving Danny a soft smile. Rubbing his eyes, Danny closed the schoolbook. "Can't help it. The French Revolution bore me to death." Digging through his bag, he found his toothbrush. "Cody said the same thing last semester when he was doing the revolution in history," said Mrs. Oswald, getting out of Danny's way. "I'll give you a ride to school tomorrow. We can figure out the buses next week." Not knowing what to say, Danny gave her a smile before going into the bathroom to brush his teeth. 5 minutes later, Danny's room was dark and quiet, a curled-up figure laying under the blankets, but it wasn't Danny. Floating by the window, he was taking in his handiwork, 2 years of sneaking out on nightly patrols had taught him how to make the bed look occupied. Facing through the outside wall, he flew up to Danielle's window. She was sitting in her bed, her phone illuminating her face. Knocking on the window, she turned around and gave him a raised eyebrow. Sticking his head through the wall, Danny smiled. "You want to come on a patrol with me?" he asked. Biting her lip, Danielle looked down at her phone. "Don't take this the wrong way, but I'm not a hero like you," she said, glancing back at Danny through her bangs. Smiling, Danny nodded. "It's okay," he said. "Do me a favor, though. Call me if they find out I'm gone." "I can do that," smiled Danielle. Before she knew it, Danny was gone from her room and speeding through the night sky towards Emmett Park, where he met up with Sam and Tucker on their scooters. Returning to his room at 3:32 a.m., Danny sank down on top of his bed. Turning back to Fenton, he gripped the edge of his blanket and rolled over, becoming a sleeping burrito, before he could so much as kick the pillows and books he used as a dummy out of the bed. He'd planned to return much earlier, but a ghost haunting the cinema changed his plans. There hadn't been much of a fight, more of a cat-and-mouse chase that ended with Sam catching the ghost in a thermos. After that, they'd gone to the Fenton Works to send the ghost back into the ghost zone, but Danny's parents had been in the lab, making the whole thing take much longer than it needed. Finally being able to rest, Danny was grateful for the dreamless sleep. When the alarm rang in the morning, it didn't survive the first beep. Danny's hand came down on it too hard, and the plastic casing broke with a satisfying crunch. Rolling over, Danny buried his head in his pillow and went back to sleep. The next alarm to go off was his phone. Growling, Danny rolled out of bed and forced himself to be careful when he turned off the alarm, so as not to break the phone. Sitting down in his bed, he was about to fall back to sleep when there was a knock on the door. "Time to get up, breakfast is on the table," said Mrs. Oswald. Grumbling an answer, Danny got up and looked around for some clothes. He had just put on a pair of jeans and was looking around for a t-shirt when the door to his room opened. "Hey Fenton, you awake yet? Breakfast—" Danny had reacted instinctively, slamming the door in Cody's face. There was a shout of pain that echoed the taste in Danny's mouth. Danny could hear Mrs. Oswald in the hall outside, talking to a loudly swearing Cody. "He broke my fucking nose, Mom!" Cody growled. "I don't think it's that bad," said Mrs. Oswald. Grabbing an old t-shirt from his bag, Danny tugged it on, his heart racing. "Danny!" called Mrs. Oswald, knocking on his door. "Can you come out here?" she said. The fog of sleep had completely lifted from Danny's thoughts, and he swallowed his own worries before opening the door to his room. Cody was standing opposite the door, a hand pressed over his bleeding nose, his eyes shooting daggers at Danny. Mrs. Oswald gave Danny a raised eyebrow. "Would you like to explain what happened?" she asked, in a calm tone that still managed to convey her displeasure with Danny. Shrugging, Danny looked at Cody. "He didn't knock." "And for that you broke my nose?" snarled Cody, his words mangled. Shaking his head, Danny met Cody's eyes. "Sorry, I didn't mean to slam the door in your face. Maybe next time you'll remember to knock," he said, turning back to his room and started shoving down his school books in his bag. Mrs. Oswald sighed. "Breakfast on the table. If you don't hurry, Daniel will eat it all," she said before turning to her son. "Come on, I'll get you some ice for that." As soon as they were gone, Danny sank down on the floor beside his bed. Taking deep, calming breath, he got his racing heart under control. Tugging on his covers, he went through what had just happened. He'd been standing in the middle of the room, wearing only a pair of jeans. Cody had walked in. He'd only gotten a short look, but he'd seen the scars on Danny's chest and back, and then Danny had slammed the door in his face. He reacted in a similar way in school, before and after gym class, if anyone walked in on him changing. He wasn't embarrassed about his scars. He just didn't like when people started asking questions, or stared. He couldn't explain them all. Bowing his head, Danny calmed himself. He was sorry he'd hurt the twat, but didn't feel unjust for slamming the door in his face. It wasn't his fault. Pushing himself up from the floor, he checked that everything he needed was in his bag, and then left the room. Sitting beside his half-sleeping cousin, Danny got himself a bowl of cornflakes. Cody glared at him over the breakfast table, a piece of toast in his mouth and a pack of ice pressed against his nose. "You want juice or cocoa?" asked Mrs. Oswald, filling Daniel's glass with orange juice. Swallowing his mouthful, Danny glanced up at the woman. "You got any coffee?" he asked, feeling the energy kick he'd gotten a moment before subside, letting the fog of sleep take over his brain again. "Sure. Cody, what do you want?" she asked, walking around the table. "Nothing," growled Cody. Mrs. Oswald placed the juice on the table in front of her son before walking over to the coffee machine and started loading it. Finishing his bowl of cornflakes, Danny looked up at Cody and rolled his eyes. "What?" the young kid asked. "Nothing," said Danny, taking a piece of toast and started putting peanut butter on it. "I would just recommend that you lay down. It will stop the bleeding faster." "Yeah, Thor," responded Cody, pouring orange juice into his glass. "How do you know that?" asked Daniel, blinking up at Danny with sleepy eyes. "Broke my nose not long ago, and it's simple physics, if you think about it," he said between bites of toast. He hated toast. "I could break your nose and you could show me," said Cody, getting a whack on the head from his mother. "How did you break your nose?" asked Mrs. Oswald, and Danny got the impression she wasn't asking out of curiosity. Shrugging, Danny took a large bite of his toast. "Got hit in the face playing football," he said, retracting the part where he'd been tied to a goalpost and got used as target practice by the football team. He let some of the balls hit him and used his ghost powers to lessen the impact of the harder balls. After the tired of the game, the football team with Dash in the lead left Danny tied to the post, intending for him to be stuck there all night. But Danny just faced free and flew home. "You play in the school team?" asked Mrs. Oswald, pouring 2 mugs of coffee, handing one to Danny. "Daniel is in the high school hockey team," she said, giving Daniel a proud smile. "Team's already full. Anyways, I don't like the game that much," responded Danny, drinking his black coffee. End of chapter 8.